Hello, everybody. My name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author, idiot, and loin streamer, and today we're going to be doing a tier list of everything or most of the things that I read in 2025 and kind of try to do an overview of what those books were about and the opinions on those books. Most of them, not all of them, have a full-length discussion on this channel to talk about. There are a couple that do not. I'm still gonna try to give a basic idea of them if I can remember, but the long form video discussions are what help me remember a lot about the books that I just don't get if I don't do those. So we're going to see what I can remember of this last year and all of the books involved. And if you did not watch any of those discussions and want more in-depth detail about any of them, they're available here on the channel. But otherwise, let's just tier list them to show where it's at. And I don't think any year of tier listing for books has been quite as brutal as when I started doing the ALA books, because I had 2 years worth of ALA books, and those are on lists for requested removal for a reason. They're brutal. They're usually dark. They're draining in different ways and often sexual, but not always sexual. And so they just have like a different effect on the reader. They're not fun to read. And not that every book has to be fun to read, but the point is they're exceptionally brutal. And when I did 2 years in 1 year, it was hard. Now, this year, I didn't have any ALA books to read. I do think I read a Margaret Atwood book because it was requested removal in Utah, and so I used that as a stand-in. But all of the books on this last year's ALA book list I'd already read and discussed on the channel, so I didn't have any of those this year. I have tried to, at the beginning of the year, was reading stuff from my reading list, and then starting summer, I started grabbing stuff that you guys suggested or sent to me, which that facet is still available in the description down below. If you have a book that you would like me to read, whether it is your own or somebody else's, then you just want my opinion on it, you can submit it from the Linktree link, and I'll take a look at that when I'm grabbing books. I theoretically should be grabbing some books from that, I think sometime soon, but at the moment I just grabbed a couple of books for Louisiana folklore and ghost stories in preparation for writing The Wild Heiress, because I want to play with some Louisiana folklore and probably come up with my own for Whitehall as well. But so I want to vibe with that. So I'm going to be reading some of those, probably not discussing any of those in great detail since it's research. But yeah, after that, I'll probably be getting back into fiction. Not that folklore and ghost stories aren't some level of fiction, but it's different. It's different. And if you've got some recommendations, I know I have that, and I have a Native American folklore book that I need to finish for a similar reason, because the Cassidys would have a lot of information, especially Bill, since he traveled around. Anyway, that's getting off to the side. So a couple of things before we get started. The usual. Number one, if you enjoy what I do here on the channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Number two, if you would like to be featured on the channel, check out the links down in the description below. The number one way to be featured is through Lamwai, the monthly prompt writing contest, where I give you a prompt, you write a short story using that prompt, and on the first video of the month, we bask in your creative genius, your playfulness, your whatever it is you decide to do with that. This month is naked and afraid, basically. Take your characters and naked and afraid them. The second way to be featured is if you are an indie author and you have a book out or a book that is coming out. If you submit the first chapter and the cover, that chapter will be read here to hopefully help more readers find your work. I'm hoping to get back into doing that soon, so that'll be like Monday videos. And the third thing is, if you are an author and you would like feedback on your work, kind of like a workshop, be very gentle. It's not the same as when I do a review video, because I'm looking at it from a creator standpoint as opposed to, and from a crit partner standpoint, as opposed to a consumer of something that is already out that I paid for. So very different interactions. And I do try to give feedback that hopefully either gives something to think about or, you know, inspires. And maybe it's not helpful, but I do try to be as helpful as possible, because I don't think the best stories can be written by an island. They're written by people who see the writer's vision or journey or desires and then help lift them up to polishing to that skill that they are looking for. And I don't think, especially, at least I'm speaking from my journey specifically, but I couldn't be the writer that I am today or continue to release books of the degree that I believe they are without the help of the wonderful people around me. And you guys know who you are. I'm not going to say I would say it if I didn't feel like it was somewhat like getting too personal and like specific, but like you guys know who you are, and I'm exceptionally grateful for all of your help and just making me a better writer by giving me your feedback and letting me incorporate and you guys seeing my embarrassing earlier drafts of things. So, and by that I mean I try to get it as far as I can before sending it to people, and still I get embarrassed because I always find things that, yeah. Anyway, I digress. There's that. I try. That's also a Monday thing when I bring back Monday videos, which they will be back. I'm taking some chill time to just chill. If you haven't noticed, things have slowed down just a little bit. It's a struggle bus, but we're getting through it together. I would like to get through my audiobooks at some point as well. We'll see. And then the last thing is, if you would like to check out any of my books, they're available at any of your favorite places to get books. And my newest novel, The Legend of Bill Cassidy, Book 1, American Princess, will be coming out this summer. That's the goal anyway. And these are three of the main character cast. The American Princess is right there. Can you can you guess which one if you don't know who she is already? So with that said, let's get into the tier list. And my brain just stopped because I just saw Soul Fraud, and that was like the biggest letdown earlier this year. Oh my gosh, the cover is so good. It's like not. It was not it. We're gonna go chronologically because it'll be easier for me to track it with my Goodreads, so I can get the authors' names and everything as well. I don't know how well it'll help with actually remembering detail, but hopefully that'll help with getting all of the information out there. First book that I finished last year was A Ribbon of Sand by Mike Shannon. And that was a book that I read the first chapter of for the Fresh Meat feature a couple of years ago. And I really liked the style of it. The world building was so strong. And it's a literary fiction. It's kind of like a Catcher in the Rye, but different. If if that means anything to you, the main character is going through a coming of age story, and he there's this divide where he lives that is racially related. And I mean, I remember a ghost lighthouse, and he's kind of friends with some black people, and he doesn't really get along with others. After the first chapter, I wasn't a super fan of it because it kind of lost the depth that it had in the first chapter and sort of became more of a wish fulfillment thing. And the main character was absolutely like insolent the whole way through. And like, he's a teenage boy. Number one, it's fine. He's a teenage boy, growing pains. That's all part of what you kind of would expect with a coming of age story. But it's also him looking back, and there are judgments that he makes on things that are not accurate, and assuming that he is just a victim of everything. So nothing that he actually failed at was his fault, but the failure of everybody else. And in some cases, yeah, I mean, sure, that's also a story to be told on its own. I'm not even going to say that that's not a legitimate story, but it didn't like build into a cohesive arc of something to like show anything. And he was like the best boy and also the most downtrodden boy of all time. And like all of the bad guys, bullies, teachers, whatever, were racists. And it became like just this group of stereotypings to elevate this character and diminish the other characters and make him the hero. And there was the whole thing with the ghost in the tower that never really became anything. And then he had, this rah-rah moment at the end of like telling off the bullies in the middle of this game, where it got like super power fantasy at the end. So I didn't really like it, but I did think that the writing was very strong in the first chapter, and that is what drew me to it. But at the end of the day, it felt more like a work in progress that could have been developed more, because the beginning and the ending and the character journey one way or another didn't seem fully developed. Speaking of whip, I'm going to explain. I realized I forgot to explain what my tier list is here. And good is just that I enjoyed it. So this is entirely a subjective meter of things. Like, all of my ratings are just subjective, my personal opinions on things. And just because I don't like something doesn't mean that you won't like something, and vice versa. I've got particular tastes, but I never want to say that something is worthless or bleh just because I didn't like it, though I do have some books on here that I may say were a waste of time. Still, I have strong opinions on certain things. I may express what those strong opinions are. Don't we all have a little bit of strong opinion? But I am happy for people that love anything that they love. I can just only tell you what my experiences were with things. Anyway, so my first one is good, which is just like I enjoyed it. What more could you ask for? The levels of enjoyment may vary, but at least I enjoyed it. All right is like it was fine. Like I don't actively dislike it. I don't actively have any issues with it. But I didn't like I wouldn't say that I enjoyed it either. It was fine. It exists. What the frick is just a category of its own for like not good, not bad. It just had what the frick elements in it. I mean, it could be good or bad, but also what the frick. So good and bad can go in what the frick, but then Whip is like I see the potential in it, and it felt like it just wasn't ready yet. It could have used some more development. And then RIP is just like I hated it. Like I sorry. Sorry, I hated it. So then the next book that I'm going to talk about is The Dark Scientist by Lauren Chambers. And if you recall the Dark Descendants series, I ran into his books because he submitted them to the Fresh Meat feature. And I read the first one, I think, last year. And then I read The Dark Scientist. And I really, really liked the idea of The Dark Scientist. I think I was a little let down by the ending of The Dark Scientist. Or it was, there were some like incongruencies in it that just didn't make sense. I remember that. Okay, so The Dark Scientist is, I need to try to remember to give you guys a quick summary of these. The Dark Scientist is about a young woman who works at like a science lab, and they've got monkeys being tested, and this woman eventually meets this gentleman who is like very attractive to her and gets involved with him, and it turns out that he is like eating people, and that special diet of his of eating people keeps him looking young, keeps him strong, and she kind of gets sucked into that life via interacting with this guy. And one thing that I really enjoy about Lauren Chambers' books is one, I never really know where they're going. He has a draw to the way that he writes, and I can't tell you exactly what it is, but it's like something that tickles my brain and it makes me want to read more of what he writes, even when I'm not a super fan of the book. And we'll get into that with some of his other books in the Dark Descendant series. Oh, Dark Violinist was the first one. I read that last year. But he's got this thing about his writing style that makes me, or about his stories that make me really interested in seeing more of what he's going to do. And like, I think that's the biggest thing with Lauren Chambers is like, I know there's one more book in the Dark Descendants series, and then I'm also looking forward to whatever he does in other series, because I just think that there's a draw for me in the way that he writes. Anyways, I enjoyed that book, though I did have some suggestions or recommendations for it, or some things to pick at it, but I really enjoyed the tension, which I think he is really good at. I think he's exceptionally good also at building the scene. I mean, tension and setting the scene. He builds the tension in such a slow but even way that also builds the mystery, and his interpersonal interactions are also exceptional for me, which is something that I liked about this book, and it's something that I liked about The Dark Butler. I think The Dark Creator was the biggest struggle for me, and we'll get there, but I liked The Dark Scientist, and maybe that has to do with the Wendigo and like some vampirism stuff going on there, but I'll put that in good because I enjoyed it. And then I like wondered, how much of this did I come up with? I don't know. I just really enjoyed it, and I look forward to what Lauren is doing, and just I hope that he is still writing, because I just look forward to what he does next. The next book is Hapless Homesteader by Alex Ratcliffe, and Hapless Homesteader Vaxdemic Book 1 is pretty much fanfic inspired by COVID, of like a shut-in guy who works in IT going through the start of the pandemic, where he just doesn't even know what's going on. He has groceries delivered and he's shut in his house, and then realizes one day that his groceries aren't coming in. Apparently he's not watching the news. Apparently nobody at his workplace ever discussed what was going on. So then when people stopped showing up at his door, he had no idea what was going on. And then he goes outside, and it's basically empty world syndrome, where there's like not even dead people anywhere, not even chaos from like the end of times coming in, because everyone was freaked out about this pandemic, and he goes to the grocery store and it's not even disgusting in there, and he finds warehouses of food later and it's not even disgusting in there. But anyway, the whole thing is basically like it's kind of an RPG. So he learns how to be a homesteader, and in a way it is written that it talks to the reader about the things that he is learning as he goes, and like building things and starting a farm and then finding a wild woman who was a veterinarian who suddenly somehow forgot everything about society and living and just became a shut-in wild girl that he trained into being his wife. It was really gross. Honestly, there are very few books I think this year that I would say were a waste of time, but Hapless Homesteader felt like a waste of time. Not just because it was Minecraft with COVID, that it was COVID fan fiction, that it treated women. It had the mommy woman who was the older lady who took care of the main character until he met somebody who could be his wife, and then mother died and the other chick took over, and she just existed to make him chicken nuggies and get pregnant, and then he met Mennonites at the end, and the grammar was all over the place to the point that it was like switching back and forth mid-sentence with past tense and present tense, so it didn't really have a grasp of language. It needed so much help. But also was just, unfortunately, a waste of time to me. So there's that. The next book was The Dark Creator, and that is a story about a young man who eventually gets sent off to stay in like a boarding school. He inherits a bunch of money. Like, I remember parts of this. He had a rat, and there's like this whole thing with clones, and he like gets raped by his own clone because this person wishes that they could live forever or something, and he doesn't realize that he is a clone until as the story goes forward, and he like writes an essay for his school that's exact plagiarism for somebody else because it thinks the same way. And I think one of the other things that Lauren Chambers does, Dark Creator is by Lauren Chambers, in case I forgot to say that, is that it asks philosophical questions in general with the different wishes that the stories are putting forward. And so this one, it sort of presented this idea of what is individuality, and do clones have individuality? Can they develop different perspectives or personalities, or are they always just a derivative of whoever they're copied from? And I'd say this one was my least favorite. I want to put it in WHIP because it didn't feel like a fully formed idea with the way that the characters interacted, with the way that the story went. It felt much less guided, like it had an idea of what it was going. And I do remember the beginning didn't quite make sense with where the ending went. And it also just sort of ended with action that again didn't make sense to me for the style of writing. So unfortunately, I think The Dark Creator was much more in the whip category, but I do think that it still showed the general interest and ideas and draw that Lauren Chambers at least has for me, which I think is fun to explore. The next book that I read was Everyday Sexism by Laura Bates. I'm going to put that in all right because it's a nonfiction book that kind of just covers different ways in which women face sexism, and it's more taken as a it asked for people to respond and share their specific stories in like workplace and academia, and then shared those and put stuff around. And I think that it's obviously going to be political because it's about, sexism. And I think specifically because it has perspectives from different people, it can help give an idea to those who may not understand what a lot of women go through. And I think that it would help the discussion in general because I feel like I run into so many people that don't understand or believe that there are these social and economic difficulties or career difficulties that happen and are just regular, or physical difficulties because of sexual intimidation or abuse. And then it kind of gets laughed at that it's not that common, but it's more like you just don't have exposure to this thing. So I'm not saying believe everybody and everything that ever says there is a complaint, but I do think we run into an issue, and I see it a lot, and I've seen it a lot over the years, where I don't know if it's new. I don't know if callousness has been ever been out of style. But I think the less that you try to listen and empathize with other people, regardless of their background, I think men should be listened to and empathized with, and women should be listened to and empathized with. And different backgrounds in general should be listened to and empathized with, and we try to get to an understanding of the difficulties in which other people are going through or have been through or experiences people have been through in order to see more of the world and possibly find an equilibrium for us all that might be better, as opposed to listening to people say their struggles and then saying, well, you're lying, or I don't give a crap, or what about me? I think that callousness of like sharing a vulnerability and then saying, well, what about me, is something that deeply poisons everybody. And it's also like if somebody says, hey, I had this experience in this situation, and if you fall in line, like if somebody in the Everyday Sexism book says, hey, I had a situation with a man and this is what happened, it's not an attack on all men. It's a statement of fact of somebody's experience, and that should be able to be shared in the same way that men should be able to say, hey, I had this experience with a woman, but also not blame all women for the bad experience that man had, you know? And I think we get into very dangerous places, and I've seen very dangerous conversations that are really disheartening and upsetting, quite honestly, that just turn into demonizing everybody instead of remembering that we're talking about people, we're dealing with people, and what conversation and relationships in general should be, whether it's, you know, friendship or neighbors or family, is we should be trying to understand each other better. We should be trying to make connections. We should be opening our hearts to seeing what other people need. And there's always going to be people that are just, they're brass hearted. And I really, really try personally to not let myself get too cynical, which some days it's harder than others. Today, as I'm recording, it's kind of hard. I've been like just wanting to go back to bed all day because I'm just like, I'm not feeling it. And I'm trying not to let myself get cynical and upset and distrusting, because there's always going to be people out there that just want to bash you over the head and hurt you when all you're not even doing anything, or when you think that you're friendly and they just bash you over the head. And it's just like, this is the world. There's the people that make me think, ugh, I hate humanity. And then there are the people that are like, I don't want to punish the people that are genuinely wonderful for the actions and the poor attitudes of the people that aren't. But it's hard. Anyway, I think Everyday Sexism was fair. I think for the most part, it was actually pretty even-handed, and it gives a lot of different areas. There were things in it that I disagreed with, but you don't have to agree with everything in a book in order to find it valuable or insightful. And I do think that there are people that will have issues with it and issues with reading it, because there's also stuff about intersectionality in there, which still, I mean, even if you disagree with things, you need to keep an open mind and an open heart in order to understand the different directions in which people are coming from. Because if you close your heart to understanding what influences somebody's logic or somebody's life and experiences, then you're not going to understand them. And because I feel like the disclaimer is needed, just because you say, I understand where you're coming from, you're not condoning or co-signing everything that they say. That's also such a dangerous place that then shuts off, hey, we should never try to understand each other, because if we try to understand each other and do understand each other, then it means that we are saying they're right and we agree with it, which no. Anyway, enough of that. I hope I made my point clear there. The next book I'm going to talk about is The Devil in the Dark Water by Stuart Turton. And this was a book that was in like the 1700s, 1800s, set on a boat. And it had to do with like a curse seemingly showing up and killing people on this boat. And there was a detective guy that was being taken back to the UK. It like started in India because it had to do with the Dutch trading company. And they were taking this guy back to the UK to be, or to the Nordic lands, I don't remember exactly, but to Europe, to be tried for, I think it was murder. And since this detective guy was in the brig, they couldn't technically use him to solve the murder. So they used his assistant, who was kind of a big, brawny guy who didn't have much of a brain. It was just bad. It was so bad. Like, I enjoyed Evelyn Hardcastle a lot, but for the ending, and then the more I thought about it, you know, the theme became worthless, but I enjoyed the writing of Evelyn Hardcastle a lot. But then when I read The Devil in the Dark Water, it kind of revealed to me more Stuart Turton's style of writing and the themes that he wrote with, and how he thinks he's Well, the way that it comes off, I don't want to make any accusations or assumptions about Stuart Turton, but the way the writing comes off, which it's just trying to like do a twist to like spring it on you and show you how smart the author is, and that you're like so stupid. It's how clever and how much better and enlightened is how the book reads. And like with this, once you get to the end, you have like a whole chapter at the ending, which is just the perpetrator sitting there explaining everything to, I think, Arden or whatever his name was, to just be like, this is how smart I am and why you could never stop me. And this is just the mechanisms of how smart I am. And I'm putting that in RIP because I hated it. I hated it so much, and I did not expect to hate it because I liked his previous book. But the more I read Stuart Turton, the more I understood what kind of writer he was. And now I know after reading 3 of his books that he is not a writer for me. And I can at least say that I liked the writing choices for the most part of Evelyn Hardcastle, and that the character influences in Evelyn Hardcastle were brilliant, but he is not a writer that I enjoy. And that goes for theme, which unfortunately that does happen. But we'll get there because I have one more book by Stuart Turton to talk about for today. The next book I'm going to mention is Men Who Hate Women, The Extremism Nobody is Talking About by Laura Bates. And that's the same author that did Everyday Sexism. That is also a book that came out, I think, last year. And so since I found Everyday Sexism to have some interesting insights, I decided to give her newer book a look at its insights, and it was far more political and far more biased than the Everyday Sexism. And so I personally don't really recommend it, but it does heavily discuss like different right-wing sub areas of hatred for women, like incels, and it's just very specifically points at how right-wing men hate women and in certain ways, and then brings it back to Trump. And it's very one way, as opposed to being like sociological and looking over all of things in society that might influence the anger and violence towards women. And so that made it very distracting to me because it's going to be very dated because of the political insight style of it that is so pointed. So I really didn't like it because it just felt so biased to the point that it's like I could log into Twitter and see this, and it's not really an examination of these things or why people get into these things or how this mindset works, and it was really disappointing. The next book is Werewolves Don't Die by Anton Truer, and that is a book about a young Native American man in, I think, like Minnesota, maybe North Dakota. It's up there. I think it was Minnesota though. And his neighbor is murdered. He gets into a fight with a school bully who lives just like down the street from him. And shortly after that, his neighbor is murdered and the house catches on fire. And the cops are investigating things because they think that this kid is the one that did it. And it's a story that has a lot of distrust to the cops. It also is a coming of age story because dad takes the main character to the tribe so that he can hang out with family and also learn more family traditions, go through the becoming a man ceremony. And so you have some of that while the cops are also kind of sniffing around. I can't say that I liked this book because it was very much a mockery of how cops work, which I know cops, they're sometimes, they sometimes mock themselves for true. But it's like when you have a cop that's just like running at somebody with a knife in the open somewhere, like the way that the story ended didn't make sense. But other things that I just didn't like about this book specifically were that it was like, it's a piece about the culture and sharing the cultural story and growth of the character, but also because the rituals and everything of the tribes are so secretive and they have to stay, within the tribe, you just have like references to stuff without actually explaining it or bringing you in. So then the story keeps the reader at arm's length. So I didn't feel like it was quite really a story. I mean, it was referencing stuff, and maybe it's more for, I'm just not the audience for it. But I'm going to drop that in WHIP because I think that the beginning, the end resolution having to do with the fighting the bear even and the wolves, because there is a moment of fighting a bear. I think that was Grandpa went and tried to fist fight a freaking 2,000-pound bear. Like, oh my gosh, go watch the video for that. There was some ridiculous in that, which I just could not get over. But I think it could have been a really fun idea, but it just, I don't. I don't think it made it there. The Last Murder at the End of the World by Stuart Turton is a story that is basically everybody that's left in the world is on this little island. There's like a smog around the island, and there are a couple of scientists on that island trying to create a peoples or bring back people, humanity, whatever, who are all in like ice pods since the end of the world. But they're also using these versions of like human clones that aren't quite human, but they're not human. They're like a derivative of human that are supposed to be without violence and supposed to be better than humans. And then somebody on the island, one of the scientists, is actually murdered. And they're like, how did this happen? These humans, non-human humans, can't actually do this violence. What's going on? And so then you've got this search throughout the story of who the murderer was and what is actually going on. And something that this book tried to do was have an omnipotent narrator, an omnipotent AI character that's in the heads of all of the villagers because they're just born with it there. But also it tried to do a mystery. But you can't do a mystery where you don't know what's going on and a whodunit while also having an omnipotent narrator in everybody's head who does know whodunit. There were so many issues with this that it just did not work for me. A rip for it. Oh my gosh, it just made me mad. It made me so mad to read this stupid book. I'm remembering it. But also, it's another book that, like, you read Stuart Turton going forward from behind, and, like, in Evelyn Hardcastle, I mean, I don't want to even say it's redemption because, like, the end of that book, it never actually has the murderer character be redeemed. It's like somebody else fought for her life to be redeemed in exchange for, like, him forgetting that she ever did anything wrong. And it's just like, that's not actual redemption, but whatever. She didn't earn it. He didn't earn it, but he's favoring her over the sister that she murdered, but whatever. At least there was a hopeful-ish ending there. Then in Devil in the Dark Water, this one was just like, rich people suck, humans suck, we're going to become the 1800s, 1700s Batman because the rich people don't suffer from the justice system, which understandable anger there. And then freaking The Last Murder at the End of the World is just like, people suck. All we can do is restart because everybody sucks. And it's just like, I can't get on board with that. Like, I know that I was just being upset a little bit ago about just like how unempathetic people are and how much it kind of hurts to like people sometimes, but there are too many good people in my life that I love and care about, and too much goodness that I see other people doing that like I might get sad regularly enough, you know, from time to time because of how people are. But I know that there are wonderful people in the world. There is unending compassion and love and charity that I just cannot believe, and I can't punish the good people for like the worst psychopaths that exist in the world. There's no possible way for that. So then when you get into Stuart Turton's thing, he's like, basically wipe it all out. Humans are a wash. Let's make humans plus. I'm like, I can't do this. I get the frustration that's probably behind that, but I just can't do it. The next story to talk about is Covalence by Andy L. Smith. And this was a book that I read as a favor. It is a YA dystopia book that ends up being fairly generic. It's like, the main character's name is Mineral, I think it was, and you've got like 4 different districts in which people are assigned in this universe when they are old enough. You've got like the scientists, the laborers, the enforcers. Was artists one? I don't remember, but the main character is in the engineer/laborer side, which is why her name is Mineral. And then she obviously falls for a guy who's in the enforcer side, and her parents are dead. Guess bet you can't get, and she's an orphan by BT Dub. She lives in the little orphan house, and I bet you can't guess how they died. If you guessed that her parents were rebels and got killed by her love interest parents, you were right. But this story is so generic that it calls stuff like the power, the city, the blah, 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 that it's just generics. The most generic of YA dystopians that ever existed. And I always have issues with dystopians as well that have like this controlling totalitarian regime, but somehow you don't like see where the resistance is coming out of somebody, where their wake-up call is, like any of that. They just kind of always know better. The good guy always knows better, despite being brought up in the situation where they wouldn't. So I'm putting that in rip, because freaking no. The next one is The Dark Butler by Lauren Chambers, and that was about like this desperate guy. I remember him getting arrested at the very beginning and then like getting this job to be this guy's assistant. He was like a bit of a brute loser, and he became this assistant to this super rich guy that got him really cleaned up and was like, follow these rules, and if you follow these rules, then you may end up having a long-term job here. And there was like some snake tongue going on with this guy, the rich guy, that he had this ability to just control you with suggestion, which I thought was, again, really interesting. Again, with Lauren Chambers, he does such interesting character interactions with such tension that I just like am constantly waiting for the payoff for. And I remember with this book, there was no payoff. It just sort of ended and it didn't make sense. And you had like the intro, the inclusion of the Dr. Lauren Chambers in here, which Lauren Chambers is a pen name. But you had that character in here that didn't really make sense either. But I did think that the Dark Butler was interesting and better than the Dark Creator. But I just remember there not being a payoff and being disappointed by it. But you'll have to watch the whole video to go and get that news. But that goes in all right, because I do remember really liking the interactions between the main character and the rich guy, and like waiting to see when the shoe would drop. And the shoe never dropped. That was the issue. It was like it was all there, but the shoe never dropped. The next book is The Village of Light by Madeline Muse. And this is a book that read very, very much like middle grade. It was super immature feeling, but then also constantly swearing. So it was a very awkward vibe. But the way that it was written, the story style and the characters, even the shallowness of the characters, not that middle grade has to have shallow characters, but they're not introspecting. They're not growing as characters. They're just going on this journey once they find this village of lights underground and discovering magic. The story itself, I can't really give a great description of, because it kind of gets lost in itself. It doesn't really end up having a plot because it just loses itself in being there, and the character is undriven. And the character also, the main character, is just freaking rude. So I know that there is magic involved. I know that she is trying to find like the betrayal in the village that's underground, but there wasn't really solid world building to it, and it just became confusing to read. But I'm going to drop it in whip more than anything. I think it could have had much better chances if the swearing was removed, it focused on the character journey and what she needed to do, and it was a middle grade book. The next book is The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov. And this was a book that we read for the Friday night loin stream at the very beginning of the year. It was a pretty lengthy book, but it being classic Russian literature, it's going to be a bit of a chonky. It was very fun. It was very unique, and it gets more unique and more interesting the more you know about the cultural things going on at the time, because it is very much a satire on social and religious issues going on at the time. Now, it opens up with a poet who was hired by a local magazine to write a poem that is strictly anti-Christ and like anti-Jesus. And he gets in trouble with the literary editor because, like, while it is not positive towards Christ, it legitimizes Christ as a person by having written about him. And that's kind of where the ridiculousness starts. So you've got all kinds of shenanigans that go on with the literary magazine. And also there's somebody in the park where they're meeting at the beginning of this book who is a version of the devil and overhears them talking about whether Jesus Christ existed or not. And this guy predicts that one of them is going to die that day and lose their head, and lo and behold, in the next like chapter, the guy trips while leaving and his head lands on rails and he gets run over by like a train cart thing. And yeah, so there are vampires in this. There's a talking cat named Behemoth in this. There are all sorts of chapters that kind of bounce around in ideas in order to opine on certain things. And if you know the history of what's going on at the time, it amplifies what is going on in the book. There are also chapters that are rewritten stuff about Pontius Pilate and the Bible, which were probably the slowest chapters for me and felt the most disconnected, but that is also because of my own information, for lack of better ways to say it. And so, yeah, it was a great book that I think would have meant more, even more, if I was much more educated on the time period and the history that was being critiqued at the time. But it was fun anyway, and it was a magical realism book. Oh, I gotta put that in a tier. It goes in good. Where are you, Master and Marguerite? There you are. And the next book is Soul Fraud by Andrew Givler. And I came across this book just by being on Goodreads, and I saw the cover, I saw the title. I was like, that is an intriguing title. That cover looks great. And since Bodymore is also a book that deals, with the afterlife, I was like, why not? I would like to read more of this stuff. The book was not good. It was about this dude who makes a deal with this devil, and he says that, like, he gets the quote wrong at the beginning of the book that was like, the devil went down to Georgia and he was looking for a soul to steal. He was in a bond because he was way behind, so he was willing to make a deal. And it like misquotes that and gets it wrong at the very beginning. And that's when you know it was not going to be good. It basically turns into an overall power fantasy, supernatural adventure story where the dude just becomes super powerful. And as you go forward, like the idea, and Lilith gets there and we get reminded of how hot she is. And I think she had red hair. And the one thing that you can count on this story to do, and why I didn't read further in the series to see if it would be better, is it pretty much ignores the comments or choices that were made earlier in order to just push the story forward. So it seemed like when I was reading the synopses for the other stories in this series, they're basically episodic. So what happened previously really doesn't matter. And that includes like the death of his girlfriend, I think it was, that was involved. Anyway, it was not good. I can't even say whip. It needed so much work. It was not good. It was not enjoyable. A Witch's Sin by Daniel B. Green is another story I read this year, and that is about a girl who kind of works for the cops, but is kind of also a rogue cop, somebody that gets hired, a merc. That's probably a better word to use, a merc. And she gets pulled into this power game that's going on between the vampires in this cyberpunk world and the corporatists in a way, but it's not actually corporatists. It's actually just the government. I shouldn't say corporatists because corporations have absolutely nothing to do with this, which is one of the things that made it not feel like cyberpunk. It was just like totalitarian government that was also religious. So we have that carryover from his Breach of Peace series as well, that has a totalitarian religious inspired government and how they're racist against vampires. And the whole thing with the vampires being like they're sneaking around killing people for food and then covering for each other. So it like really didn't work for me. And I can't even call it a whip because I really don't think that it was even at whip level. I think that it needed so much work. It feels like it just copies stuff that it sees in other places or the author thinks is cool and sticks it in there, but it's not like it doesn't have an understanding of how to put stories together or elements that go in stories. And it was just boring, if not feeling like it was just nothing unique about it. Nothing stood out for it. The next story is Alliance of Deceit, a Vito Rosario novel. This is book 2 in a series by Fred Gray, and this was also a book read as a favor. And this is about a action man. This is basically dad fiction, by the way. Action man, spy, whatever. And he is going to try to find his daughter. He is also a monk. I'm pretty sure he works at the at the Vatican and is like a spy not serial killer, but a merc basically for that. And it's what you might expect from a spy thriller where it just twists and twists and twists, and his best friend is like a Tibetan monk, but there's nothing about him that's Tibetan monk, and he's not even like a Tibetan guy. He just like went to the Tibetan mountains to be called a Tibetan monk, but has zero beliefs, shows zero signs of this religious belief that he's theoretically, and it just titles him as Tibetan monk. I don't know. Garbage. I should have rated it lower for the friend, but I was trying to be reasonable. Screw me for ever being reasonable. That's what I'm learning again and again and again, honestly. Sorry, I'm getting a little cynical at the moment. It's just being a day. I'm going to do all 3 of the Hell's Library books together because I don't feel like I need to separate them. So this year I also read The Library of the Unwritten, The Archive of the Forgotten, and The God of the Lost Words by A.J. Hackwith. And I initially found The Library of the Unwritten just on Goodreads. I saw the cover, I saw the title, and I was like, okay, cool, let's read that. It also goes into, heaven and hell and afterwards stuff. And so whatever. I am taking I also saw that it was about a librarian, and I was like, I want to be proven wrong about stereotypes relating to some of these things. I was not proven wrong. This is a story about a woman who died and then became, I think she killed herself, and then she became the librarian of the Library of the Unwritten, and that's where books go or ideas go when they are given up on, basically. And then one of them gets out. Like, her job as the librarian is to make sure the ideas stay in the library as books, but they can get enough energy, they turn into people, and then they try to go out and find their writers to convince their writers to finish. And so Hero gets out, and he goes out and finds his writer, and then she has to trail after him, gets him back in, and then you have this whole hunt going on for this mystical item that Lucifer wants for one reason or another. And at the end of the story, spoiler alert, she becomes a god. Yeah, it's pretty much nonsense. It doesn't stick with the story that it was trying to tell. And as it starts, like, with the Library of the Unwritten and it being about inspiration and telling stories and how inspiration takes on a life of its own, it didn't really stick with that, and instead went into this whole holy war about how, like, God is missing and God is evil and the angels are evil, and that's where most of the focus went anyway. So I hated every moment of that book. I liked it in the beginning, but once you got past, like, the first 6 chapters in the beginning, it pretty much broke its promise of what the book was about. All right, the next one we're going to talk about is The Abyss Surrounds Us by Emily Skrutsky. This was one that everybody voted on for the Loin stream that we read in the book club. It is basically a giant, I should just say kaiju, because main character has a giant turtle, but there are other characters that have other giant animals that battle, and her turtle deserved better than being freaking fired on and lost at the bottom of the ocean. It was fun. Like, it was stupid, but it was fun. And the girl, her parents both work for the government and developing these kaiju, and she eventually gets kidnapped by pirates, and they want to use her to train a turtle that they can then use to fight against the government. I mean, it wasn't great. It wasn't the worst thing ever, and I think I'm softer on it because I read it with you guys, which made it better. Because Loin Stream makes everything better, honestly. The next book that I'm going to talk about is The Buffalo Hunter Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. A couple of years ago, we read The Night of the Living Mannequin on Loin Stream, and I was interested enough in Stephen Graham's writing to read another thing, and then The Buffalo Hunter Hunter came up on my feed on Goodreads, and it looked interesting, and I waited for it to come out, and then I read it, and this is about a priest. It's set in, like, the 1800s as well, and he meets an Indian guy who comes into his church at one point, and it turns out that that guy is a vampire, and you have this contentious relationship between the two of them because you have the white man who is this priest and this vampire who has a thing against the white men for what they have done to the Indians and what they continue to do to the Indians, and especially the buffalo. And it's mostly, I want to say, a literary piece. It is very slow moving. It's a character piece where you really get to learn about the vampire through the journals of the priest. And then you find out, that his, like, great-great-granddaughter or something is reading the journals. And it really goes off the hinges at the ending. And I'm wondering if that's just a Stephen Graham Jones thing, if he does that in his other books, because I think Night of the Living Mannequin also did it, though not this hard, but I'm not going to read any of his other books because the ending of this book was just so stupid that it messed up everything else, when this book really should have just been about the vampire and the pastor and their relationship with one another and how they interacted with the world and one another. But I did think that the way that Stephen Graham Jones played with vampire lore was interesting. I just think if you cut, like, the last third of the book out, it becomes a superior book because everything with the freaking granddaughter is dumb, and it also just feels like it's there to be like, I'm one of the good ones. Look, we punished the white people at the end. Like, just let the story be about the characters without this, please. Onyx and Crake by Margaret Atwood is another dystopian that is kind of set in the future. Stuff has been run through by corporations, and all I remember remember is the blue people dancing, or the people dancing with their blue penises in order to get laid. I don't know. I can't even describe that book to you. You have to go read the review. I don't remember a whole lot about it. It just goes in what the frick, because it does talk about the different things that corporations did that is not very ethical. And yeah. The Book of Accidents by Chuck Wendig is another book that just feels like it was using motifs and scenes and ideas that are just throughout like horror and then threw them all together nonsensically. This is about a family that like moves into a new house and there's weird stuff going on outside of the house in the small town, and then somebody gets sucked into a portal somewhere. And there is like a killer perspective going on, but the killer perspective doesn't make any sense. Again, I don't remember much of this book other than it was nonsense. It goes in rip, and you can go watch the video on that. Hell or High Water is about an afterlife. Oh, and that was by Celine Kaposky and Beth Warburton. And this person, the main character, basically crashes on a highway on a motorcycle on his way to doing something and ends up in purgatory that looks like a carny studio. And they are, I think it was a dude. And he's like kind of going through his memories, trying to figure out where he is because he doesn't remember what happened. And there's just weird things all about. I do remember a very random sex scene in this book that was a lesbian scene specifically. It felt very put on for show for the audience. I don't think that this book was fully actualized. I'm sorry. I'm going to just keep being like, go watch the video because I don't remember too much from this. My brain flushing is getting too good for this. I say my piece in the videos and then I just bank it. But I think that this was more of a whip where the beginning and ending didn't really connect. It had random character perspective switches that didn't make sense, didn't turn into anything. Like the girl that had the lesbian sex scene, like she didn't do anything for the story, and there was no arc when there could have been, and stuff introduced that wasn't really necessary. But it could have been flattened out. Stigma Play by Andrew Verlaine automatically just goes in what the frick, because it's a story that is just throwing what the frick scenarios at you at increasing intensity to try to get you to have a what the frick reaction. And it basically says that empathy is a mental illness. I mean, that was my takeaway. What the author was going for, I can't tell you. He did leave a comment on the video, so you can go and check that out for extra context on his part. But it basically says we're all making ourselves crazy by being empathetic to people. And it's just a couple of doctors, like 4 doctors, kind of reminded me of the Marquise de Sade's 120 Days of Sodom, where they have a person that they have now put in this VR situation to live out other people's lives and see how the mentality affects them or how the memories affect them, and kind of catalog it. And they turn into demon pigs and have an orgy at the end. And like the idea could have been interesting to like watch a person deteriorate as they go through these different traumas, but it didn't actually do anything to monitor this stuff. And it really just made a comment and then made a couple of other political comments that had nothing to do with anything like racism, and in the way of just saying like claims of racism are bogus and DEI is bogus and all of that. And it just felt like a political diatribe and a dismissal of the importance of psychology, and pretty much the same thing where people talk about like suicidal empathy, which there is such a thing as being too empathetic that you give away yourself to danger. But this was just like empathy will cause mental illness, so stop being empathetic is what I took away from it. You Better Watch Out by James S. Murray was a Christmas themed thriller where this criminal guy wakes up in the middle of this snowy town he doesn't remember being in after being attacked by some old people, and it's Saw. Basically, where they're being hunted, but they don't know by what or who or why. And he finds a couple other people who also have sordid pasts and is like, what is going on? We need to get out of here before we all die. And the big thing about it is just being like this winter wonderland with these saw-like contraptions and being slowly hunted, or quickly hunted at some point, in this place. And it turns out that they were abducted by this chick who is addicted to murder. She straight up says that, BT dub. She is addicted to murder. So her parents made her this place as a playground for her to get her addictions out, where they just kidnap people and let her die and let her kill them for fun. And it was just a stupid book. I'm sorry. It was so stupid. It was requested for me to read. I I hate the sensationalism of stuff like that. It's so dumb. Casually Homicidal by Olivia J. Bennett is a story of two teenagers coming of age. They're both 18. One of them has an addiction to pain and torture and wants to be a murderer, and the other one is a superficial, like, upper class girl who never really has gone through anything but wants to kind of discover herself. And they set off on a road trip. One of them, the outcast guy that wants to murder, decides that she is the perfect first victim for him and she is going to do it on the road trip. And they're traveling out to Montana and then Washington to kind of see the coast. And they go through a couple of shenanigans on the way, and they both go through a coming of realization that they are loved and life isn't as bad as they thought it was. And like, I get what the author, I think I get what the author was going for with this story, but I think it could have been developed more. And I do feel like the perspective of the homicidal teenager was heavily off the sensational side, where it just read try hard. It read like, oh, I'm writing fan fiction of an idea of a murderer. I don't know. I don't know. The Butchering Art, Joseph Lister's Quest to Transform the Grisly World of Victorian Medicine by Lindsay Friz Harris goes into good. It goes into love. I adored this book. I think it's such an interesting book on the history of Joseph Lister, who, yes, was the inspiration for Listerine, was part of changing how surgeries were done by recognizing you needed to clean stuff while you were doing surgeries. And even the reference showing before and after Lister was involved in surgery and what ideal surgery looked like, because it mentions those images, is astonishing. He changed the face of lists of surgery entirely. And then you also learn about Louis Pasteur, who was discovered microbes and was the person that discovered pasteurizing. So I highly recommend that book in general for the history behind it. There is so much extra information about what's going on at the time with other people, with the America World Trade show, where that's where new inventions and new discoveries were shown all the time from all over the world, and just a very educational, very thoughtful. And Joseph Lister was a really incredible person. He was also a Quaker, but he didn't allow his like religion to hold him back. His religious upbringings told him back, and the religious upbringings that he had actually helped inspire his practices and his bedside manner in a way that was uncommon at the time. And then at the end of his life, he was like, forget everything that was about me. Whoever writes about my life, just write about the things that are important and forget the person behind it. But the nephew was like, no, who you were as a person is important to the work that you did. So I'm not going to like forget who you were. I'm going to share who you were. And I agree. Who Lister is and what he discovered, what he brought to the world are intertwined. And I think it's such an important thing to see how people's upbringings and the hardships they go through and the life they go through inspire and influence people in the choices they make later in life. And it's a really inspiring read. Just, I can't recommend it enough. And that was one that was recommended to me, which is also a good example of why I love when you guys recommend books. Even if I don't like them, some of them, I will always find great things in there and great things that I would never find without you. So please continue to share books and I will continue to read them to the best of my abilities, which... The next one is Buried Deep by Allison Miller. This is a family drama that centers around a dad going through, I think, alcohol relapse, and he calls his buddy over, or his kids call his buddy over to help talk to him. His kids, he's got one that's a 37-year-old supermodel and another that's in his 20s. And the daughter and the friend start having like getting in a relationship with each other, and it's just like nonstop drama for drama's sake. I don't have a whole lot to say about this because it really just, it's meant to focus on the daughter and the dad's friend, and it tries to make it sound taboo, which is something that was really weird about it, because she is an adult and you have other adults that are like, hey, but you're like 50 and she's like 38 and this is weird. But it's like, you guys are acting like she's 18, and something tells me that she is supposed to be underage and it was changed just from the way that it reads. I don't know. It needed to be shorter, it needed to be more focused, and it needed something. It felt like a whip to me. It's going in whip. Did I dislike it? Well, yeah, because it felt like it was a mess, but I feel like it was closer to like being in the difference I feel like between whip and rip is like whip is, I could see it being developed into something else with the elements that are there. And then rip is like, no, this is what it is. It's just bad. I just didn't like it. John Dies at the End by David Wong is the first in the series of John Dies at the End. We read this also for Loin Stream, and it's about a guy not named John. It just goes it goes into WTF, like straight up. Where you at, John? We got Penis Land in the middle there, but like he gets infected with, was it the drip? No, it was the sauce. Something else. I was like, what the frick did the drip come from? The drip was in Daniel Green's book. The sauce is what it is. And it like, I don't know, it changes reality basically. And I would say that the writing style of John Dies at the End is interesting because it's also very like talking to a reporter the entire time. So he's like recalling and going into flashbacks at the same time as he's like sitting there talking to people. It's a choice. It's not my kind of book, but it was a choice. It was an experience. Let's go there. The Hunt for Elsewhere. I'm going to drop this in Whip by Beatrice Vine, and that is about a fox who gets separated by his family due to a hunter and then goes on a journey across the country to be reunited with his family. But also in the time of that, he becomes a man on his own, and he also meets this wolf. He meets a raven as well that helps, instill values in him and teach him. But then him and the wolf become friends, and he helps the wolf realize the wolf's own shortcomings and fears and all of that. And it's really just a coming of age story of the fox coming into his own. And then the second half of the book is all adventure story. So it kind of leads you wrong in setting up what the story will be about and where it's going to go. And that's part of where it feels like a whip, is it doesn't do the setting up of where the story is going to go in the beginning. It's basically done with the coming of age once you reach the first 1/3 or something, and then the whole rest of it is adventure novel, and randomly you're in a nature reserve thing where they're watching a bunch of other wolves that are just killing. They've got like tyranny wolves that are killing the babies so they can stay in power, and the humans at this facility are not like doing anything about the wolficide, caninicide going on in their own facility. I don't know. It was a choice. It did feel very messy though. The next story is Paper Tigers by Lou Aguilar. I'm just dropping this in RIP. It doesn't need a whole lot. A conservative guy gets a job at a newspaper in New York City alongside a liberal girl. They're both interns. He's looking at her ass the whole time. It's pretty much just like every right-wing talking point from 2016 going on and on and on and on, and everybody around him going, you're right, you're right, you're right. We've got, the protesters are here, the police can't do anything, but they want to do something, censorship in the Hollywood, and liberal women get super wet for conservative men, and everybody actually just wants the movies that are all about slutty hot women being saved by dads. And it's just like, and let's not forget also, all women should just stay at home because guys think that's better, and all guys really hate it if their woman makes money, especially more money than him. You should quit your career and your job. And also just misogyny is an actual way to go. Like, go watch the video if you want to see all of the pain that's involved in that. Like, if it's not obvious, I'm over it. And then we have The Potion Dealers, a jet age cozy fantasy romance by Lydia Foxglove. This was a buddy read with a friend. I can't even call this a whip. Like, it doesn't feel like a fully formed idea. It feels like fan fiction of fan fiction, or of somebody's own characters. It doesn't have a plot. It doesn't have a story. Like, you start off with girl from a village that is separated from technology, and they like live in huts basically and don't have paved roads. And then this rich guy who is also blind shows up to ask her to break the curse that was put on his family because his family was fighting them in a war decades ago, whatever, and they all got blinded by this magic. And he actually doesn't want to be unblinded because he likes being blind, but his parents are like, hey, he thinks that his parents think lesser of him for being blind. He doesn't know that, but he keeps asserting that. And yeah, it's kind of just hanging out most of the time until it brings in, oh wait, this evil spirit thing that was going after her parents is now trying to take over her body and replace her. And also here's some random political things. It's all part of some like bigger world. Jet age doesn't really make sense to me because there's no setting in this story. The characters are just non-existent basically. And yeah, I can't even put it in whip. It's just, like, I know I just explained that whip and rip are different, but like this book should just go directly in the trash. But I'm glad other people enjoy it. But for me, it's so hard to have like strong opinions but also not want to jump on other people. Like, I'm not trying to insult other people for their preferences. I just don't like it. But it seems like I'm having a moment right now where it's just like, what is the point of having any opinions? Because I get yelled at or I get ditch talked every time I just say, hey, I'm just supposed to shut up and listen to other people have their opinions. I'm here for your entertainment, yeah? Sorry, I'm having a moment. Quackery, A Brief History of the Worst Ways to Cure Everything by Lydia Kang. I'll put that in like all right. It wasn't my favorite. It wasn't my least favorite thing. I didn't really like the narrative style because it was like making too many jokes that just took out from actually discussing what was going on. It's full of interesting information of different medical things that people tried over the all of the years of humanity, at least the ones that it tried to cover. But I feel like the actual writing style distracted from the information and was not helpful to the information. The Queen by Nick Cutter is about this guy. I mean, technically, it's about a girl who's following all these clues to find her missing friend. But technically, all of this is happening because a guy, when he was like 10, saw his sister get eaten alive by ants in Africa. And he popped his boner, his first boner, whatever, and had his sexual awakening watching his sister get consumed by bugs and decided that he wanted to fuck a bug. So he tried manipulating, mutilating women, experimenting women, young girls, not even women, young girls, they're all teenagers, into becoming bug girls so that he could fuck a bee. Yeah, it's another one of those stories, much like Stigma Play, where it's like, let me see if I can freak you out. Look, I'm going to be as disgusting as possible. Incest, I'm going to mention incest. Shit, I'm going to mention shit. Bugs, I'm going to mention bugs and body horror. Are you freaked out yet? Oh, I'm going to mention some rumor that was going around about a girl fucking her dog. It has nothing to do with the story. I'm just going to throw in as much as freaking possible to be gross. And when you do that, at least for me, I'm like, that's pointless. There's no weight to any of these words. You're just throwing them out to get a reaction, and it doesn't elicit a reaction from me other than like a roll of the eyes because it's immature. Don't Get Blood in My House by Matthew King is a book about a couple of mystical, I want to say mystical creatures. One of them's a witch. The other lady has a spike ball for a head, and then you've got the other guy who has a chainsaw man. Anyway, they're all summoned to this house for bring a victim with them, and they're going to kill those victims there in order to get some sort of power from some overseer that doesn't really show up. But the whole thing is they need to water the house in order to keep Limbo and Earth in synchrony with each other. And that all kind of goes out the window when it's really just a story about the three women becoming witches and everybody else dies, and then it congratulates itself is really what it is. It felt like a love letter by the writer to their own characters, but it didn't feel like a fully formed story to me. So I'm dropping it in whip because it does feel like there's something there. It just didn't get there. Butter by Asako Yuzuki is a story about a woman who works at a Japanese newspaper, and she goes in to interview this woman who was claimed to have murdered like 3 or 4 of her husbands or lovers, even though there's no proof of it because they all died in ways that were not actually murder. But people are like, that's so suspicious. And this woman was also very big on cooking. There's a lot of discussion in it in general about the appearance of the accused woman because she weighs more and doesn't really fall into Japanese beauty standards. And so they're like, well, how the heck did a fatty like that end up getting so many guys? Why do people want her? Meanwhile, the main character, as she's interviewing the supposed murderer, she is also, 1, falling for the charm of that woman, and then 2, she goes on a journey of herself, of understanding herself, her own personality, finding freedom in who she is as opposed to the expectations that society puts on her, and finding her own identity as well as who she is with the community around her. And I really enjoyed that book. I recommend that book. Do not go into it expecting a story about actual murder. It is a character journey. It is literary fiction, but it is enjoyable if you know that's what you're going for. It got like a lower rating because a lot of people went in thinking that it was going to be like murder action stuff, and it just was not. Of Silk and Death by Samantha Luna is a story set in like the 1920s New York about a young girl who's a teenage girl, I should say. Young girl, kind of a teenage girl. Her parents are the head of housekeeping and the head of operations at this opulent hotel in New York, like the biggest one. It's basically got a mall inside of it. It's got a hospital inside of it. It's got all this other stuff inside of it. And people start dropping dead inside of it. And there are also spider webs turning up everywhere when they really shouldn't be. And so the book is this mystery of like what is happening inside of the hotel, as well as a little bit of The Great Gatsby, where this girl is getting to know this guy that she knew as a kid, and he's come back now. And he is very well off, and he feels like he is inferior to what his father expects of him. He is unable to do anything but throw parties, and he wants to prove himself to his dad that he is not totally useless. So you've got the two things going on, and I feel like that second part is only there to bring in parties into this thing for the feel of it. Bring in parties to this novel just for the feel of it, for the vibe of it, because nothing actually comes of the parties. It doesn't build the love interest's character at all, and this feels more like a whip to me because just nothing from the two characters that are central to this are built into. The next story is Crew of Exiles by Neil Holschultz. This was another book that I read the first chapter of for the Fresh Meat Features on Mondays because I picked those up. I promise you I picked those up. And a guy wakes up on Earth and there's nobody there. It's empty Earth. And he's like wandering around scavenging until he finds himself at like a VR electric place where he hooks himself in because he is miserable. He doesn't like his body. He hates it all. And he is something that's called a post-human. So he's never really had a body before. We find out that he is on Earth because he is being punished for a crime he committed. And that crime has to do with having convinced another post-human that if they didn't want to live, they could just kill themselves. And the only way to kill post-humans is that post-humans have to want to kill themselves and realize that they can die, and then they can just kill themselves. And so he did that, and it was called murder, and then he was placed here. And this is where he meets when he's playing the video games, living in the VR to escape from the bogus life of his body, and how it's all working while there's no one in existence. Not entirely sure, but in this video game, he meets this woman named Fife, who is a younger woman with a savior complex, with a martyrdom complex, and she is desperate for other people because all of the real people from the video game disappeared a while ago, and she doesn't know how or why. Her family basically hooked her up into it a while ago and then left her there, and she's been there ever since, and over the years, all of her online friends have disappeared and she doesn't know why. And then she runs into signals that say, hey, here's a person in existence. And so she gets out of the system to go and find him. And then they escape Earth together with a couple other people that they meet along the way. And since the main character, Beryl, is being punished for his crimes, the people that have punished him come searching for him because he's not actually allowed to break out of jail, i.e. get off of Earth. And then that causes conflict between him and everybody around him. This didn't feel fully realized. I'm putting it in WHIP. The Roundhouse by Louise Erdich. I'm going to put this in It Was All Right. That is about a native kid. His mom comes back late from her errands one day, and she is just totally out of it. It turns out that she was raped and somebody attempted to murder her. She smells of gasoline, and she is not speaking about what has actually happened to her. And this becomes the story of the 13-year-old-ish kid trying to track down like what happened to his mom, who did this to his mom, and his dad involving him inappropriately. And really, it's a story of the community as you get to know his aunts, his uncles, his grandpa, and how he relates to the people around him. The way that it inserted sexual humor into it while it is also about a violent sexual crime was very weird to me. And it also just sort of ends in a weird way, which, you know, that worked for what it was doing, sort of, but also I think the majority of the issue with it is there's no like building action, and at the end of it there's just like there's no looking over really all of the things that these kids did. Like they mistreat the priest, they assume the priest is this child molester or whatever, this rapist, and they invade his privacy and they peep on him while he is in the shower. And he, you know, the main character also watches his own aunt give his grandpa a freaking lap dance and a boner. And we never like discuss any of this while the story is also about the governor who is a racist, the governor of Montana, I think it was, or Dakota, who's a racist who tried to adopt or is adopting this Indian girl to try to make him look less racist, and also killed her mother, and that her mother was a young woman who was in a relationship or a forced relationship with a much older white guy who was using her, and he tried to kill her because there's a lot, and it doesn't ever really connect for me, but the writing was beautiful. Rebels Creed by Daniel B. Green is the second book in the Lawful Times series. It ends with a suggestion that there will be more. That I don't know if there will be more. It's kind of a mess. It's also a story of a tyrannical religious government that is also using people with magical powers to like squash rebels, and an awakening of these people, this young guy who was in the police, seeing how people are being abused by the government and by those in power, and his basically adoptive mother was turned into an experiment of like a kaiju squid. Actually, I like to imagine him as turning into a Kiva from Sam Finna's stuff, because the way she was described, and like her arm turning into a battle axe. Anyway, it was a mess. I can't even put it, I want to put it in RIP, but I don't even feel like it was ever fully completed. It just feels like an idea that was thrown away and not ever finished and not fully realized. And it suffers the same issues that Daniel's other works suffer for me, and that they don't have an identity of their own. This works with generic references to stuff. It works with references to things that like feel important to the author. And this is not me making claims on the author's part. I'm talking about just like my interpretation of what I was seeing. And so I don't know. It doesn't feel fully realized, and it doesn't feel like it understands how to tell stories, how to put a story together. The next story is Sins of the Fire. Where is Sins of the Fire on here? The next story is Sins of the Fire by Phoenix Ward, and this is about a college student who has extreme anxiety, and he stumbles upon a magic pen one day that actually holds a dragon's spirit in it. Now, this dragon takes the shape of different items depending on what is most useful to whoever it appears to. So it was a sword in a past life. Since this kid lives in modern day city, urban area, it turns into a pen for his college, and it actually helps encourage him to work against his anxiety and become better. And while being a tsundere, and while he is doing that, he is also fighting against these people that want to kill her as a dragon because of a war that happened during the Crusades where the dragons were attacking their people, and so she was one of them that got away. And so that is also happening, and he's having to deal with her demons while he's learning how to use her powers through his body. And for me, this felt more like a whip. I didn't feel complete enough to put it in RIP so that it's just like bad. But it did feel like a work in progress to me, and definitely felt like an early book and just needed more development. The last book that I'm going to talk about today is going to be hit or miss with some people, and is Everything is Tuberculosis: The History and Persistence of Our Deadliest Infection by John Green. And this is a nonfiction that discusses different ways in which tuberculosis has influenced history, kind of in a surface level of things. It doesn't go deep dive into things. It also takes into consideration some level of geography and the way that different races and nations have been affected. And if you are more sensitive to political positions or political discussion in books, you may not like this book. If you're also looking for something deeper about the influence of tuberculosis and more specific things, this is not going to be your book. But this is an overview book that I think is fairly good if you haven't really gotten into tuberculosis before, or aren't aware of just how prevalent it is and how long it's kind of been following people around. I'm putting it in all right because I think it'll be useful information for some to even just get their toes wet in tuberculosis, but it is definitely not going to please everyone. So yeah. So those were my books and my ratings for the year of 2025. I mean, those levels, they're not as bad. The fact that the levels are not as bad tells you that it was a better reading year than the year of the ALA books. Anyway, let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below. And when I say that, I also want to know, can you remember your favorite book from last year and your least favorite book from last year? Share those in the comments below, because maybe, just maybe, I'll pick them up to read them, because I'm looking for good stuff, okay? I want to know what you're reading, what you enjoyed, what you were the most critical of. If you want to give information as to what you loved or didn't love about either of them, I would love to know. Was it a good reading year for you? With that said, thank you so much for joining me. If you want to know more about most of these books, I have a backlog of book discussions where I go into detail about them when it's still fresh in my head. So there is that. And I look forward to reading more this year. With that said, thank you for hanging around with me. Have a great week, and don't die.
To my children, Tommy, Annabelle, and Ike. If you forget everything else I said in the lifetime I had with you, I need you to remember these 3 things. 1. I believe a woman's love is the most powerful thing on this earth. It can start wars, end them, and change the devil himself into someone God might see worthy of giving a second chance. She don't owe this love to anyone, but she do carry it around with her so long as she is living, and to give it away is something special. This is why evil will do anything it can to pervert women's nature and destroy their innocence. Of every crime you might commit during your lifetime, be it of daring or necessity, for every defiance you may act out against God, government, or man, avoid harming the innocent, for the day that we become bloodthirsty beasts where love don't exist anymore is the day hell on earth has come. And as bad as it may seem at times nowadays, we ain't there yet. For this reason, minimize violence done to and by women. As givers of life, it's against their nature to do harm. Every act of violence done to them is meant to break their souls, turning what should be a giver of hope into a bitter black widow, destroying lives in the mercy of her care for no reason but to quiet the corruption of her own self. It is only when you come across these sorts of women that you should put them down. 2. Everything you do in your life will create consequences, both seen and unseen, reaching far beyond what you can imagine. Nothing you do exists solely within your arm's reach, and you'll never be able to anticipate what all your decisions will do. Think hard of every action you take, because you won't know how long your choices will stalk you. Be firm in knowing who you are outside of the noise, and live beyond the expectations or news or rumors of the day. 3. There ain't anything stronger than the family you build for yourself. Protect the ones you love with your life, and they'll give you theirs in return. Family ain't defined by blood, understand that. And for as strong as the bonds of your family are, know that you'll find just as much passion in the people who hate you. While you'll risk your life for the ones that you care about, those who find your existence to be an insult will risk themselves to put an end to their affliction. As cruel as it may seem, a man running on hate will stop at nothing until one of yous is dead. Don't let you be the ones taken from, be it by outlaw, lawmen, or anyone in between. The only one who'll be looking out for you is you and yours. Showing mercy to men who wouldn't show it to you is a costly mistake. Maybe there's another way to be, but in all my years, I ain't found a way around a man's seed for greed and pride. Sometimes I believe there ain't the ability for man to change at all, be it by lead or legislation. I ain't claiming to be right about nothing. On many things, I wish I hadn't the experience. But what I want is for my kids to live a life better than the one I did, and to avoid the hardships I went through while finding the truth and purpose in what matters more than all the gold in this country. It's my hope that by sharing the things I learned, my kids will be better than their old man ever was, and that what I done ain't what people remember me for, but who y'all are gonna become that'll be the legend of Bill Cassidy.